Good evening. It's Thursday, September the 11th. I'm about to start a new series. The next 10 videos will encompass the subject matter of paradoxes, paradoxical themes in the pursuit of yogic knowledge. The one I will start with is covers the area of effortless effort. Well, that sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? An effortless effort, and it's known in Hindi and in the language of the yogis as Prayatna Shaithilya. Prayatna Shaithilya. And this is going to be a modern perspective. I'll be integrating some of Shankara's thoughts. If you've watched any of my videos, you're already familiar with who Shankara is. So let's move right on into the introduction. Sorry about that slow start, but I had a little trouble clearing my memory off my phone before I started, and it left me not flustered, but left me a bit uncomfortable with my start. Let's say it that way. An old yogi should never become flustered. If he's worth his salt as a yogi, that is. Introduction. In the name, and I will be reading from my own text that I've written, and then I'll also be paraphrasing, as is my usual habit. In the domain of yogic philosophy, there resounds a phrase that at first glance appears paradoxical, yet upon deeper contemplation reveals profound wisdom, and that phrase is Prayatna Shaithilya, or effortless effort. The reason I'm doing this series on paradoxes is because in my previous 40 videos I've done, occasionally I'll run across a paradox as I'm speaking, and I'll always say to my listener, who may be you and may not have been you, that I'll get around to explaining paradoxes later. Well, I finished my first 40 videos. I'm shooting for 50 by September the 30th, my birthday, my 75th birthday. And so I have 10 to go, and I have quite a few days to go, don't I? I have 19 days to finish 10 videos. This is the first of those 10, and they all are on the subject of yogic paradoxes. So, at first glance, in yogic philosophy, there resounds a phrase that sounds paradoxical, which I just pronounced for you, Prayatna Shaithilya, effortless effort. This concept, evoked in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, is a beacon for practitioners seeking balance between action and surrender, striving and letting go. Yes, that sounds right. And letting go. Let me reposition myself here. I always like to have Lord Shiva in the background. They're kind of looking over my shoulder and maybe blessing my discourses or my talks or my visits with my viewers. That's not superstition, it's just a habit I've gotten into. A little superstition, I'm sure, is thrown in there somewhere. The key word in superstition is super, meaning above. This concept, evoked in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, is a beacon for practitioners seeking balance between action and surrender, striving and letting go. The resonance of this idea is not confined to ancient texts. It echoes in the insights of modern thinkers like myself. I'm also known as Sakshi, which means the witness. That's my pen name, and it's the name I gave my soul, Sakshi. And the philosophical treatise of Advaita Vedanta, particularly in the thoughts, the non-dual sage Shankara, Adi Shankara, Shankaracharya. This discourse endeavors to explore the multi-layered meanings of effortless effort by weaving together classical sources, comparative philosophy, and contemporary commentary. Well, those last three mentioned, classical sources, comparative philosophy, and contemporary commentary, are my specialty. I've been practicing and working towards mastery of those three for about the last 50 years, in dealing with yoga, first as a teacher and now as a yogic philosopher. The phrase Prayatna Shaithilya appears in Yoga Sutra number 2, verse 47, where Patanjali addresses the practice of asana, which is the physical side of yoga. I do the philosophical side of yoga. Started out with the physical, moved to the philosophical, and most people in the Western world are very familiar with the posing and the breathing and the mat and the studio and the teacher, and that falls under asana or asana. The heart of the sutra is the paradox, and I'm quoting him now. I'm quoting the great one. Perfection in asana is achieved when the effort to perform it becomes effortless, and the infinite is reached. That's from Patanjali's work. The heart of the sutra is the paradox. One must exert effort to maintain a posture, yet the ultimate goal is a state where that effort dissolves into serene stability. There was a very famous yoga master in the early 20th century, towards the mid-20th century. He was known as BKS Iyengar. He wrote the book on poses, so to speak. He explains in his one of his works, Light on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, that the practitioner is called to cultivate alert relaxation. In other words, you should be into the positioning and into the physical yoga, but you should do it in a form of alert relaxation. The body is active yet unrestrained. The mind is present but not agitated. The non-agitation and unrestrained is what he meant by alert relaxation. I, as a modern yoga teacher and philosopher, have delved into the practical and psychological dimensions of Prayatna Shaithilya in my essay, Effortless Effort, The Art of Letting Go in Practice. I wrote, to practice effortlessness is to withdraw from commitment, but to empty the self is not to withdraw from commitment, but to empty the self with a struggle for control. In the yielding, the deepest intelligence of the body and the mind are revealed. It's a bit philosophical, but I'm an old yogi, and that's how I write. That's how I think, that's how I write. That's how I speak, that's how I narrate, that's how I present. I suggest that the essence of yoga, and indeed all authentic spiritual practice, lies in the subtle shift from forceful striving to receptive awareness. Well, that's a form of letting go, isn't it? Effortless effort is the art of tuning into the inherent intelligence of the body and spirit, allowing action to arise from a place of wholeness rather than from fragmentation. You should always work on wholeness. Fragmentation is like knowledge. Knowledge itself is impressive, but the collection of knowledge positioned and maintained and fully assimilated so that it can be utilized at the highest purpose of knowledge, which is wisdom. I have further written that we must act, we must do, but at some point the very doing must be surrendered, like the archer who, after years of practice, releases the arrow without conscious calculation. So too the yogi finds that in surrender, mastery is revealed. I'm trying to practice that, believe it or not, folks, when I do these videos in my studio at YouTube. I'm very new at this. I've been at it less than 2 months, and if you go back and review my very first videos, you'll see what I mean about I wasn't very relaxed. I was very nervous, and I didn't show the nervousness, didn't, but going off track all the time and going off on tangents showed a lack of awareness, showed a lack of concentration. So hopefully I can stay on track in a better manner now. Okay. I'm trying to keep this video under 35 minutes, and I've already used up almost 11 minutes. I have further written, we must act, we must do, but at some point the very doing must be surrendered, like the archer who after years of practice releases the arrow without conscious calculation. I know I'm being redundant here, but it's important. This idea is important, so I think it's okay if you hear it twice. So too the yogi finds that in surrender, mastery is revealed, and so shall you with time and effort and assimilation of knowledge. On the subject of yoga, my insight aligns with the teachings of martial arts and the Zen arts, where effortless effort, which is in Taoism, is called Wu-Wei, and Mushin in Zen philosophy. They signify a state where action flows spontaneously, unburdened by the self-conscious will. Well, baseball players that can, repetitively hit home runs or steal bases and make it look effortless, they're in the zone. That's what's called the zone. Back in high school, I practiced a little gymnastics. I wasn't very good, but I practiced it. It's the only sport I was actually able to join because I wasn't, I'm 5'1", so I wasn't big enough for football or basketball. Or, I had to go into the individual sports, bowling, tennis, long distance running, and gymnastics. Now we're going to move over to my favorite narrator. He is an 8th century Common Era narrator and commentator, and he's probably the best known of all the commentators having to do with yoga philosophy. His name was Adi Shankara. For Shankara, the ultimate reality, Brahman, when I hope he's everyone's ultimate reality, is non-dual, and the individual self, Atman, is in essence already one with the Absolute. When we say Absolute in yoga terminology, we're talking about the Creator. We're talking about Brahman. It's that simple. So what does effort mean in a philosophy that teaches the fundamental unity of all beings? In his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, Shankara highlights the tension between effort, which is in Sanskrit called sadhana, and realization, which is called jnana. Jnana is also another word for wisdom or knowledge. Action, which is karma, is necessary for purification of the mind, but knowledge alone leads to liberation. But knowledge alone leads to liberation. Very, very profound statement. When right knowledge dawns upon you, or me, or us, all effort is naturally abandoned. Just as once the sun rises, the night lamp is no longer necessary. The symbolism of darkness and ignorance and light and knowledge is within that passage. And I hope you understand that significance. Here Shankara points to the ultimate effortlessness as the recognition that one's true self is not the doer at all. The multiplicity of actions and efforts occurs in the realm of ignorance. Avidya is ignorance. Realization dispels this illusion, and spontaneous, unconditioned being remains. Well, that's a little heavy. Let's over that one again. The multiplicity of actions and efforts occurs in the realm of ignorance. Actions and efforts are part of ignorance. Realization dispels this illusion, and spontaneous, unconditioned being remains. So you are being. You are in the moment. You are in the zone. Only being remains, not ignorance. It is expelled through this proper usage of realization. For Patanjali, effort is a means to an end. Effortlessness is the fruit of disciplined practice. Effortlessness is the fruit of disciplined practice. For Shankara, effort has only instrumental value. The final state is pure consciousness, beyond the pairs of effort and non-effort. Yet both recognize the necessity of a journey, a progression from struggle to surrender, from doing to being. Per usual, my insight acts as a bridge. I often do contrasting opinions, not argumentative opinions, but showing some contrast between the great Shankara and my own contemporary philosophical. His is the classical, mine's the contemporary philosophical insights. My insight acts as a bridge. I state that effortlessness is the fragrance that arises from a repeated effort, a statement reminiscent of Shankara's metaphor, the stick that stirs the funeral pyre, but is itself ultimately consumed. Effort is necessary, but its highest function is self-annihilation. The highest function of effort is self-annihilation. The highest function of yoga is losing yourself, and in the egoic sense, and returning to the simplicity of knowing you are one with the Creator. This is what is meant by self-annihilation. You cannot truly annihilate the soul, which is the true self, because the soul is a spark of divinity, as I always say, on loan from the Creator to the human body, from the first breath to the last breath. It comes from the Creator, who is eternal, and the soul is eternal. It returns to the Creator, who is eternal, and the soul is eternal. So, in the classical religious phrase that you often hear in the old movies, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We come from ashes, we return to ashes, so to speak. We come from the power of the Creator, from the source, and we return to the source. There it is. Effortless effort in practice. Now, we're talking about beyond the mat. When I say the mat, I'm talking about the yoga studio. Mindful practice begins with conscious effort, whether in meditation, asana, or daily tasks. Notice the tendency to strain or control outcomes. Well, when you first get into yoga, you're so into the posing, you're so into the perfection of the poses, that you strain to control the outcome of your efforts. Well, that's totally contradictory to the philosophy of yoga. Yoga is freedom. Yoga is to lose yourself in the action, not in the effort. And you go, well, how can it be action without effort? Well, yeah. You ride a bicycle without effort, don't you? And that's just performing an action. Now, you didn't when you first started. I remember as about a 6-year-old boy, my father, who was in his mid-50s at the time, I was born late in my parents' life, running along beside me, bless his heart, and holding on to me and then letting go and saying, "Go, boy, go." And I paddled on down the sidewalk. I'm sure in his eyes I was weaving and about to fall over any second, but somehow I made it, and somehow I braked and climbed off that bicycle without breaking my leg or arm or busting my skull open. But there's that brave old man loving that old little boy of his, helping him along. Bless my father's heart, bless my father's soul, and my mother's, and all those people that passed on this date September the 11th, all those years ago. As Shankara writes in his Viveka Chudamani, the knower of truth sees, hears, touches, smells, and tastes, yet in reality does nothing at all, for their mind has merged into the infinite. Yes, you will reach that point once you become a knower of truth. A philosopher is a lover of wisdom, not necessarily a knower of truth. But we're on the ladder, and we're climbing, and we can kind of see the top rung, hopefully, especially when you're in my advanced age. As I have proposed, the fruit of practice is not mastery in the sense of control, but freedom, the ability to rest in being and let life manifest itself through us. We are manifested from the Creator as part of his manifested cosmos. Nothing was taken from him, and nothing is missing from Brahman, the Creator, the Absolute, the one without a second. It's all still there. It's just being displayed in a different form. We're as much a part of Brahman as the cosmos is, as the galaxies are, as the stars, the moons, and the oceans, and the atoms, and all the other particles that make up Brahman. It's worth noting that the motif of effortless effort appears across the world's spiritual traditions. And Taoism, the Wu-Wei, suggests action in harmony with the Tao, free, and sometimes it's pronounced Tao, free of contrivance. In Zen, the ox-herding pictures depict the seeker finally returning to the world, actions not arising spontaneously. In Christianity, the phrase, quote, "not my will, but thine, be done," unquote, signals a yielding to a greater intelligence. It also signals a will to let God take over, let the Creator be in charge of your life. You think you're in charge. You think you're in charge of your automobile until you hit a slick spot on an icy road and wind up in a ditch, hopefully unhurt, but sometimes not. So it's the universe that's really in charge, and the Creator is the universe, as I said earlier, and we are only a portion of the Creator. My articulation draws on these broad resonances. The vision I present is one in which discipline and surrender, effort and grace are not opposed but entwined. The vision I present is one in which discipline and surrender, effort and grace are not opposed but entwined, each finding fulfillment in the other. Now, if you think you're in charge of your life, boys and girls, and I could say that as an old man, I can call most of you boys and girls, because you were boys and girls when I was probably an adult. Now, you may be 5 or 10 years younger than me, but you're still younger than me, so I can still call you boys and girls. No offense. Each finding fulfillment in the other. But the word grace in that sentence that I created, that statement I created, is very important. Without the grace of God, without the grace of Brahman, you have no future. You have no importance. You have no position. You are strictly operating within the grace of the Creator. You are a creature of the Creator. Effortless effort is a subtle art that transcends the binary of hard striving and passive inertia. It is the dynamic balance of alert engagement and profound surrender. Patanjali points to it as the perfection of asana. Shankara reveals its depth as the very nature of liberated living. I, utilizing contemporary reflection, remind us all seekers that spiritual maturity is not the absence of action, but action suffused with grace. Well, I come back to my word grace again, don't I? So what I said earlier was a precursor of what was coming. Thus, in our practice, whether it be on the posing mat while deep in meditation, or in the common marketplace of daily life, let us engage wholeheartedly, then relinquish the fruits. Thus we must remember effort, yes, but without clinging. Mastery, yes, but only in surrender. Here and now, at the confluence of East and West, ancient and modern, the paradox of effortless effort should be unfolding as a luminous heart, showing as is the luminous heart, showing our way upon the long path of our spiritual journey on its return to the source. The source, of course, is Brahman. And thus ends the lesson, the discourse. And that's paradox number 1. Now there's 9 more to go. And I'm doing pretty darn good. I'm staying under 35 minutes. In fact, I'm at 26 minutes. So I'm just going to wrap this puppy dog up, if you don't mind, in the way I always end all my little talks between my listeners and myself, by saying, be good to yourself. I'm James Exum, by the way. I live in South Austin. Have lived here for over 50 years. Not necessarily in South Austin, but in Austin for the last 50 years. I've lived out of town on business trips for short times. But if you just look at the whole picture, I've lived here for 50 years. My pen name is Sakshi, which means the witness, which is another name for Atman, which is another name for Jiva. These are the terms and terminologies of the yogic philosophy and yogic teachings. It's good if you rewind and take notes if you like, and then look up some of the phrases and ideas I presented to you. The Sanskrit terminology can be found in Yogapedia. It can also be found in Wikipedia. I have no compensation from either one of those companies. I just merely use them myself, and I pass on that knowledge to you. PDFs can be downloaded with all the great works, all the great texts, the Vedas, the Upanishads, so on and so forth. And again, here ends the lessons, and as I say, be good to yourself, be good to others, be good to your family members, be good to strangers. And remember, it's an imperfect world at this point, politically and economically. But if we keep passing on that phrase of being civil to each other and being kind to each other, who knows? In a few years, once the current leadership has been replaced by people of higher understanding, so to speak, we'll be able to look at each other and say, hey, we're back to civility again. The barbarians have left, and we're home again, and we can be kind and nice to each other, neighbors, friends, and family. No more arguments, no more discourteous discourses in our day-to-day existences. Goodbye to you. If you enjoyed it, thank you. If you didn't, that's okay too. And I'll be working on my next paradox, and I should be recording it tomorrow for you. Good night.